One of the advantages that I found about going into the alternative media, both following it and participating in it, is that there are a bunch of other people that follow it that provide links and information to things that you otherwise wouldn't know about. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine in a Discord server provided me a link for a Senate bill that was introduced by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. And he suggested that we were going on towards full-scale socialism and they weren't even hiding it anymore. I gave Warren the benefit of the doubt and decided that I didn't want to make a judgment about it until I actually read the bill fully and put some of the legalese terms through a dictionary online and was able to determine the very root of the bill. When I stopped to actually look at the bill, I realized that there wasn't going to be much of a need to go through any sort of legalese translator. The terms are pretty well defined, and there isn't really anything that's too advanced that I saw. Anybody can sit down and read this bill and understand what's going on, and anything that they don't completely understand is clearly defined. But unfortunately, my friend was absolutely right. This is the first step towards full-scale nationalization of industry, and anybody who doesn't think that's a scary thought should definitely be sitting here thinking that that's a scary thought, because it's this practice that completely ripped Venezuela out from being a South America powerhouse economically into the situation that they're in now, where they're eating rabbits and dogs. Not only that, it is a demonstration of the fact that the people that are on the left side of the aisle that are in the federal government right now generally do have an interest in taking over every aspect of your life and controlling it. They want to control the money, and they don't believe that it's your money and it's the fruits of your labor, that it's their money and they're loaning it back to you. Now, if you look at Senate Bill 3348 as introduced by Elizabeth Warren, the first thing that you're going to notice is the fact that it doesn't say socialism in the title. It actually says the Accountable Capitalism Act. And I believe that is completely strategic because I don't think that unless you encourage people, a lot of people are going to read it. I think a lot of people who are going to see it on the ballot are just going to see accountable capitalism, and they're not going to question it because there's so many people out there right now who have lost faith in capitalism completely. But if you take some time and scroll through it, you will see that not everything is as it seems, and this is actually something that's much scarier and much bigger than any of us could have ever imagined, and I do urge everybody out there to read it. Now, in the interest of time and getting people actually interested in knowing what's going on with this bill, I have created a small presentation of the bullet points that I believe are the scariest parts of the bill, but I've also linked the bill into the description below, and I encourage everybody who watches this video to share this video and read the bill in its entirety, because it's something that you need to know. It's something that we really need to understand, that this is what the government is trying to do for us. The first thing you need to understand when you look at this bill is who is affected by it, and that's very clearly defined in the beginning of it. The bill affects any business that operates in the United States or any of its territories that makes over $1 billion a year. And as one of my friends pointed out when I talked to her about it briefly, Warren being her senator, that is just about every business that's on this soil that engages in any sort of interstate commerce. Yes, there are going to be small businesses like a one-off gas station or a little restaurant or a campground or something that aren't going to fall under this title, but for the most part, everything else in the country is going to be affected by this bill. And after everybody else is affected, essentially who's next? This is the start of something that will eventually lead down into the complete nationalization of all industry, or at least it has the potential to do so. When you take some time and look at what it is that the government hopes to achieve by passing this bill, the beginning is that there is going to be a charter system. Essentially, you are going to have to get a charter to operate under the government if your business rises to the point where it makes over $1 billion a year. According to the bill, all of this will be overseen by a director of the office as defined in the text of the bill. This man is to be appointed from the office of the president and the executive branch and must be approved by the Senate in order to look over business as such. In order to fill the vacancy before the president can find someone to officially employ, the Secretary of Commerce will be the acting director. The director is not allowed to be affiliated with any billion-dollar company in the country, so it's just got to be some guy down the street that either isn't working or is working for a smaller company. And the director will be limited to a 4-year term. Now, this director will have the power to uncharter any large business to its discretion. There isn't any defined term in the bill as to what will happen to an unchartered business or any of its holdings or assets. But the director will have the power to uncharter them, as I said, if they don't play ball, if they don't follow the rules, and if they don't go out and get a charter. Now, there's actually a pretty broad definition of these charters in the definition of the bill. It doesn't necessarily define what has to be in the charter for the most part. I think that's going to be an agreement between the big businesses and the director and the director's office. Therefore, the director can sit down and tailor a charter to each individual business to suit the business's needs. But there are some requirements that the bill says have to be in every single one of these charters. Most notably, it has to be a benefit to the general public. But there's no definition of how that's going to be defined. Basically, from the way the bill is written, it's going to be up to the decision of one man whether or not a business is operating in good faith and for the good of the general public. There's no definition of a committee or a group of people that get to decide above the executive branch of the business. We will talk about that in a moment. And it's just going to be on the discretion of one unelected person. One of the things that I noted the most when I was looking through this section of the bill is the fact that they continue to refer to the companies going forward as United States corporations. The socialist wing of the Democrat Party isn't even trying to hide the fact that they're being socialist anymore. They definitely, by the wording of this bill, want to take over the means of production in this country. They want the official nationalization and national ownership of these billion-dollar companies in order to bend them to the whims of the federal government and make them operate in a certain way. And I think this is reinforced by the section of the bill that talks about how the company executive boards are to be structured. It doesn't outrightly say it in the bill in the text, but it is heavily implied by the bill that all of the executive boards of all of the companies that make over $1 billion are to be disbanded completely. The positions will remain intact, but it will be the responsibility of the companies to hold a fair and democratic election among all employees of the company to appoint a new board of directors for the company and a new CEO. So what that basically means is a guy who went through and put his last $100 into a good idea that would help the American people and help put people to work in this country and grew his business beyond $1 billion is set to, under this bill, completely lose everything that he invested into this business, instead being ousted by the government and replaced by a group of people, some of whom may not agree with his ideas and are just working there for a paycheck. This screams problems in a company like McDonald's or Burger King or a hotel chain or anything like that, where you get a bunch of teenagers sitting out there who are basically saying, fuck the boss, we hate the boss, and that just follows up the chain of command. I assume that most CEOs out there, especially if they are the founders of the company, would sit here and try and fight this. And the bill did address this right away, and they addressed it in a pretty final form. Any company that doesn't comply with the expectation of having a fair and democratic election to reappoint the board of directors shall be fined $50,000 to $100,000 per day until they are in compliance and have a new election and appoint a board of directors that the people of the company choose. Lastly, there was a section towards the bottom of the bill that I wanted to sit down and talk about just a moment, because It seems contradictory to the fact that there's going to be an unelected director of the office that will be overseeing all of this throughout the entire country. That's a position that really screams corruption and bribery, and I expect that whoever this director is going to be getting some very extravagant gifts from a lot of people who don't necessarily want to give up their seats of power and basically have some sham elections that make it look like they complied with the law, but in essence just got to keep their companies. And I'm looking at Facebook when I talk about this. But as per usual, there is a provision in this bill for political spending. I kind of figured that this was going to be coming as I was reading down through this bill, because the Democrats in Congress can't seem to get a law passed through the government that says that corporations are not allowed to spend money in the way that they choose in order to sway political elections. The Supreme Court and the American people have decided that the money that corporations spend is spent by the people of the corporations, not the corporations themselves, and does count as free political speech. But there is a provision towards the bottom of this bill that does restrict any sort of political contribution from any business out there to being $10,000 per candidate per election cycle. Basically 10 grand a year, which is like you pulling a dollar out of your pocket to give to your local politician in order to say, hey, I want to help you get elected. When you look at the fact that this restriction only affects businesses that make over $1 billion, that's exactly the comparison that I would make. After I've taken some time and read through this bill and tried to understand what it is that Senator Warren is proposing, it's very easy for me to see that there's a reason that the mainstream media isn't talking about this, and this is being buried under any other sorts of news, like the Omarosa case or what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is doing at her rallies, rather than them talking about the fact that the government wants to come down and take over and nationalize all industry. This is just like postal banking. There's a reason that nobody's talking about it right now. And we as the American people need and have the responsibility to go out and change that. My father, who is a lifelong Democrat because of his union work, told me one day when I was very young, when I was first learning about civics and how the government works, that the honest best way for the government to work is if the president is of one party and the Congress is split almost completely down the middle of both parties, with the party opposite of the president being in a slight favor of control. When things like this happen, any sort of bill like this that might be unstomachable to the majority of the American people gets leaked out into the press and into the mainstream of conversation, because the Congress has no choice but to sit and argue about it because they can't come to any sort of consensus about it. And then, if it is something that the party that's in power proposed, it stands a good chance of going to the president's desk and getting vetoed, which would draw more news coverage. As much as I would love to see a unified government that is willing to go out and pass and repeal laws that benefit me personally and my worldview and viewpoint, I have to concede the fact that my father is right about this. It's much better for the people to hear an argument and have the government sitting in gridlock over any bill that they try and put through than for a unified government to be jamming bills through the government and passing them into law in the middle of the night and nobody knowing about them. But we also have to have a media, either dependent or independent, that is willing to talk about the fact that they are jamming these laws through. Because if the media is complicit with the party of Elizabeth Warren, as I feel is the case with this bill going through, then they are still going to try and jam it through and give it out to the people under a misleading name. And it's going to be just the same as having a unified government jamming things through in the middle of the night and nobody talking about them. This is a very dangerous proposal, and it stands antithetical to the American dream. The American dream where any guy out there can go out and throw $10 into some widget company somewhere, even if that company has a high chance of failure, and have that company actually come out and succeed, and that guy with $10 being rich beyond his wildest dreams. Between crony capitalism and a series of socialists gaining more and more power, control, and popularity in the government, the free market that I grew up knowing and loving is under more of a threat than ever in our country right now, and we need to take some steps and protect it. It has lifted more people out of poverty on the face of this planet than any social program out there that has been given out by the government. And I'm not asking you to believe me on the basis of this video. I linked the bill in the description for a purpose. I really want everybody to go out and read it. I know it's dull, I know it's legalese, and I know it's going to take you a couple hours to pick through the terms. It's very dry. But it's very important that you know that I'm not lying to you, that this is actually what's going on out there. And it's important that you get the message out there and make sure that everybody knows about it, either by sharing this video or sharing the link that I put in the description. What do you think about socialism? What do you think about the free market? What do you think about this bill? And what do you think about the fact that nobody's talking about it? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care, everyone.
You're always there for me in my best hiding place, so now